Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live author interview by Booktrib, the leading source for book news and reviews. I'm Judy Marina, one of the editors here at Booktrib, and I'm so excited to bring you this chat with Gary Bengier. Gary is a writer, philosopher, and technologist with many accomplishments to his name, one being this novel, Unfettered Journey, the subject of our discussion today. So it's set in a richly imagined near future, and Unfettered Journey is a cross-genre novel combining action, adventure, and a love story. It traces an epic voyage from inside the human mind to the vastness of space, from AIs battling in the desert to the peace and quiet of a mountain refuge. Also, it asks important social, spiritual, and philosophical questions. There are a lot of threads that we can weave together here, and thankfully, we have the author with us to help us do just that. So hi, Gary. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Judy, and it's my delight to be here with you and the audience on Booktrib today and to talk about Unfettered Journey, sort of a near future as I talk about a vision of what's ahead of us. What's it really going to be like?
Well, I'm excited to be here too, and I'm excited to hear about the near future because goodness knows we have a lot of uncertainty. So if you can give us any clues and insights and answers, awesome. Why don't
So,
you begin with taking us through the storyline a little bit then? Because we
well,
know
sure.
it's a cross-genre novel that doesn't
Okay.
fit neatly into any one category.
Well, that's right. It is cross genre. I mean, the book publishing business today, they ask you to classify it into something. It's science fiction, speculative fiction, but it really is cross genre because it's an action adventure story. It's a love story, and it is a story that asks some deep philosophical questions, like what is consciousness, and what is that I that's at the center of you, Judy, and all of us? What is that thing that is I? And then it moves on to themes tied into the storyline of the near future. How do we find purpose in this rapidly evolving technology and the world that we find that just gets faster and faster? So that's the overview. Maybe I could start by focusing on this near future world that the story takes place in. So I talked about near future. The book Unfettered Journey takes place in the year 2161. That's 140 years from now. Now, some people say that's not quite near future, but there's a reason that I looked that far ahead. That's close enough. Some of us today, we might have grandchildren that will still be alive then. And this is a hard science view of the future, so it's different than a lot of science fiction that you see out there today. And I think that much of science fiction gets it wrong. It's because it's hard to predict the future in any kind of accuracy. So if you wrote a book, 15 years ago, you probably many science fiction writers did. They missed the iPhone that came out in 2007, right? And if you didn't have that right, then the stories would seem all wrong, right? Because our cell phones are so much a part of our life. And so I think because of that difficulty, many writers sort of give up. They don't really try to think about the realistic likely scenarios for the future. So, they have faster than light spapeships. And, that's against Einstein's theory of relativity, right? It's just not going to happen. And, and they have dragons, and there's all these alien contact, which, might happen, but doesn't seem likely given what our science tells us today. Or then they go the other way. There is the Terminator view on robots. They're suddenly going to all take over and try to kill us. So there are lots of bizarre things that I think Hollywood also pushes. They make for exciting stories. But I asked the hard science question: what will it really be like? And so I think that for the next century, our two biggest technologies changing humankind will be AI and robotics and bioscience, okay? So we see bioscience, CRISPR-Cas9, the technologies that have just come out in the last 10 years that are radically changing things like the development of vaccines. And that's going to have a huge impact. But I think that AI and robotics will have the most sort of in-your-face change on humankind. And so that's the central point of my book. So think about this. Let's think about robots for just a minute. You know, we see the Boston Dynamics robot dog. If you've seen those videos, they're great, right? So many people think that the robot's going to be around the corner, and the next thing you know, we'll have all these robots. Well, I don't even believe that yet necessarily, because I think that the development of robots and AI will be a little bit more like the development of the automobile. You know, in 1910, Henry Ford had the first Model T, but it really took a century for all of the technology to come together for the automobile we know today, right? Because they had to develop, you know, windshield wipers, starters, electronic systems. They had to develop the roads. They had to develop the legal infrastructure to deal with injuries, right? And so all of that took a long time. And so I actually think that robots will take a lot longer to be walking among us than many people think. Okay. But the other side of that is that I think we can see the steps from A to Z to develop the robots, right? The better vision systems, better movement, more and more insights that are built into the computer brain of it. And eventually, I think they will be walking around among us, right? They'll probably be our size because, you know, we have all these trillions of dollars of infrastructure that we live in, right? So robots will be about our size, and they'll be walking around with us, and so they'll be doing more and more of our jobs. And so at some point, and I'm saying 140 years, our world will be transformed because we'll have robots around us. So Judy, you'll have 20 robots doing stuff for you. I mean, that's the world. So, so I would suggest that's highly likely. So, you know, you think about people who like the Star Trek series, they've got the robot Data, right? But there's only one. I mean, that's wrong even, okay? Because think about this. Think about the world when the robots are mining the ores, okay, and they're smelting the steel, and they're building the factories, which, you know, we can see more and more of that happening. And what happens when the robots are building the robot factories? Okay, when that happens, we can have a gazillion robots because it's all automated.
Interesting.
Okay, so when robots are making robots, what happens to jobs? Okay, yeah, you know, so I think we might have. I went to a workshop at the Santa Fe Institute just under 2 years ago on AI and the barrier to meaning, and which some of the experts in the AI field were there. We had a great several days together.
Oh, that must have been an amazing opportunity.
It was wonderful, and one of the presenters talked about jobs going away. And it turns out, you know, things like maybe your job will be around because they're hard to automate. But
well, thank goodness for
that. Yes, but I also think another job that will be hard to automate will be roofer. You know, the guy that climbs up on the roof and nails the shingles on, because it takes a lot of, you know, difficult physical movements and all that sort of thing. But don't we all agree that eventually they'll have a reason to automate that one too, right? Because you know, roofers will be making $200,000-300,000 a year, and at some point they'll say, okay, that makes sense to automate the roofer too. So yeah, when those last jobs go away, when they automate those, it's sort of all over, because then robots will do all the jobs almost that we do today. Yeah, there'll be creative jobs. You know, there'll be more and more leisure activity jobs. Things will transform. But the interesting point, I think, is that at the end of this transformation, what I'm suggesting is highly likely, you know, that robots will be here and among us. At the end of that, there will be lots of stuff, because robots will make all kinds of stuff, but there won't be any jobs for us. So that's a vision of the future that I think is highly likely. And think about what that does to our life, right?
Yeah, how will that Well, what can we expect from that future, and how will that change our search for meaning?
Okay.
Like you mentioned.
Okay. So that's sort of I think a highly likely scenario that's sort of a context for the book. One of the theses I have when I turn to the economics is 140 years. The conceit is that the U.S. being a place where we have much more property rights, right? We have this very capitalist system. So around the world, as robots become ubiquitous, they find egalitarian solutions. But in the U.S., the oligarchs who control the means of production sort of fight back, and so they do eventually. We nationalize the means of production. The robot factories are owned by everybody. But the quid pro quo for that in the US is that they develop a series of legislation called the Levels Acts. And the Levels Acts assign people from a level of 1 at the top to 99 sort of at the bottom. And you get a level, and that dictates certain things that you can and can't do. And it's supposed to be based on merit, supposedly, right? You can move up and down on the levels, but there's some suspicion that there's this some legacy built into these levels, right? And they're not quite entirely meritocratic. So they dictate certain things like who can vote and who can travel internationally, and who can marry whom. Okay, and so that's the conceit for the story. And so the story's about an AI scientist named Joe who's trying to create true robot consciousness because he doesn't think it exists yet, as much as people think it feels like the robots are fairly conscious, but he doesn't believe it. And so in his quest to do that, he meets a woman who is fighting for social justice to end these levels acts. And then the story goes on from there. So.
Okay. And like I mentioned earlier, the book raises a lot of important social, spiritual, and philosophical questions, and you're a philosopher. So tell us some more about those questions then that we're going to be exploring.
Yeah, well, my career, I had almost 30 years in technology in Silicon Valley, doing strategy and finance kind of jobs in a whole host of technologies, everything from life sciences to computer peripherals to bioscience to chip design to the internet. And so I had that background that gave me a lot of insights into technology and how it might evolve. And then when I retired from that career, I went back and got involved with passion projects. So I went back to school. I backfilled an astrophysics degree and then a philosophy degree, and then I got a master's in philosophy, focused on what is mentality and the ontology of mind. So that's sort of how I got to thinking about these questions of what is the I, and what is the mind, and can we make robots conscious? How hard is that project? And there's a lot of debate in the field. Many philosophers question whether it's even possible. We don't even know what mentality is, right? So how can you create it in a robot? So that's a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't exaggerating when I said that you have many accomplishments to your name. I mean, certainly well researched on the technological things, and you've also studied philosophy to a great extent. It's impressive.
But I think those will continue to be some of the challenges. So we've got this real world that I say is highly likely, where there will be fewer and fewer jobs, and there'll be more and more stuff for us to have. So our food, shelter, clothing, all of our basic needs, all of our what would consider luxuries today will all be met. But we won't have those things that make us feel productive. So how do we what do we do in that situation? We've got lots of time, maybe, and how do we manage that? That's going to be the real challenge for humanity. How do we find purpose in that sort of life? right? And so those are the sort of the spiritual questions that Unfettered Journey tries to explore.
Well, to quote you yourself, you've spent the last 2 decades thinking about how to live a balanced, meaningful life in a rapidly evolving technological world. So then, do you think you're any closer to having an answer for that after spending all this time going through these discussions and writing the book?
I I I personally think I do. I feel there's having thought about these for a long time. I think there's a way that we can approach everyone of us can approach our lives to try to find that peace, that serenity, that balance,
Mhm.
and that ties around purpose. And so the characters in my book are pursuing that kind of question. So one of the things that happened in the book, I mentioned this is the future, and it's let me just give you a sense of how that future is portrayed. We all walk around with our cell phone in our hand, right?
Yeah.
So where does that go into the future? Well, the book opens with Joe dealing with think of it as Siri 15.0, right? I mean, you can easily imagine that, right?
Yeah.
And where is that? Do we still have it in our hand? Well, no, actually, you have a chip that's embedded behind under your ear, and that's connected to a little corneal implant. It's like a little screen in the corner of your eye, so that you can actually talk to this thing out loud, and the AI in your head, if you will call up something on the screen. And so if you say, geez, I feel like a pizza, the on the screen will suddenly appear on your eye a little red line that takes you on a basically a walking augmented reality map to walk to the closest pizza shop, right? So
Seamless.
and the pizza is free because all this stuff is free. So in the book, the only thing you have to pay for is the top 10% of the more high value goods, right? Everything else is free. You walk into the store, you just pick it up and walk out. You go into a restaurant, you sit down, the robot waiter brings your food, and when you're done, you just wave and leave, and that's it. That's all taken care of. Thank you very much. Now that's not hard to imagine, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah. But that's the world where you have very few of these wants, right?
Mhm.
But then how do you find purpose for your own life in the middle of that? That's the story. So there is a part in the book that questions again this technology. If you think about it, we already have this problem with the technology overwhelming our time, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
how many people think that they've got plenty of time to do all the stuff they need to do? I
Yeah,
think we're all overwhelmed with social media and
definitely.
too much to watch on TV and too much streaming and too many choices. And we've got a gazillion things to do, and we have no time to sit and think.
Well, that's why your vision of the near future, it really does seem realistic, kind of terrifyingly so.
Well, I was pleased with one of the reviews from She Single magazine. The writer says that it feels eerily authentic.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
and that gets back to my hard science view of the future. Again, most folks think of this as something that's so crazy out there. As I said, cyborgs, all going to be cyborgs. No, that's not true. It's going to feel like the way we feel now. It's just that I mentioned this technology, the Siri 15.0 in your head,
Mhm.
the fact you haven't shipped. But if you think about that, the first thought, it might be, wow, that sounds very scary or very odd. But in the year 2000, if someone would have said that we walked around with this phone constantly in our hand, and the people would walk down the street talking to themselves, everyone would think that's crazy. So
Right.
I think it will feel very normal. So our technology become more and more embedded in us, and it won't be weird, and we will still be us. That's key. We will still be us. Humankind has evolved for a million years, and it's taking a long time for us to get to where we are. And And all of that evolutionary history is something that's not going to change very much. I mean, and one more example. They talk about the cyborg in a lot of sci-fi, that we're going to suddenly upload brains into computers, which I think is completely nonsense. As I said, we don't even know what consciousness is. So, or we're suddenly going to be able to be super smart and fat and think really fast. Well, that's kind of crazy too, because our brains operate in chemical speeds, right? It took, as I said, hundreds of thousands of years for us to develop vision and hearing as our two main. The human brain has an area on the back of the head called V1. It's the area for the visual cortex. And it is the largest part of the brain for sensing. The RV1 area is larger than the brain of a cat, okay, by itself, just for vision. So it's taken all of that time for that to be highly evolved so that we could outrun the big cat, right? So it's fairly clear, I think, that any interface with computers will go through vision and hearing, right?
That makes sense.
And so it doesn't matter how fast the chips are, our computer chips are ridiculously fast already. The bottleneck is getting that information into our brains in the way we can sense. So we're not going to change that speed. We will be able to access information more quickly, just like now we can look up Wikipedia. So we'll be able to, think the word Booktrib, and up will come a little passage in the corner of our eye that tells us about the history of the company, right? Or I will walk up to you, Judy, and the corneal implant will face recognize you, and it'll give your bio, and I'll say, hi, Judy, how is XYZ, and I'll be able to talk to you. Yeah, that sounds crazy, but that will happen. So that will seem like that will actually make us sort of, in some sense, smarter. We will be able to process information faster because we can access it faster, but it's not going to change our thinking, right? So again, a high, realistic view of the future is both eerie, I think, but it's still us.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So one of the last things I'll mention about the book is that, so as we think about this technology, one large part of the book actually deals with what would it be like without this technology? What if you had to go back to the beginning without any technology whatsoever? Could you survive on your own in nature? Could you survive? Could you find your own food? Could you grow your own food? Right. Could you figure out how to survive in the wild? And so that's one of the challenges that my characters face in the book.
Well, because we'll be so far removed from our original pure human selves at that point.
Well, maybe it'll take us back to something that's fundamentally human. And then maybe it sort of puts in front of us the question very clearly: what is good and bad about our technology, right? And so many novels take us back in history. There's the novels for the various romantic eras, Scottish Highlanders, and on and on and on. That's historical fiction, right? And we can imagine these idyllic pasts. The reality of it is probably wasn't very nice. Okay. And so if you start imagining what it would be like without our own technology today, or the even better technology in 140 years, how would it be without technology? Then we can ask ourselves more clearly, what are the pluses and minuses of technology? What trade-offs are we making? So again, that's another theme that I have running throughout the book.
Well, throughout the book, I don't know, do you have any particular favorite characters or moments or scenes that you can touch upon without giving us too many spoilers?
Oh, that's a hard thing, because I had difficulty dealing with spoilers because it's a very tight plot, so I don't even want to mention all the characters. But
Totally fair.
but I have to say, I'm just so pleased with my powerful women characters in the book, and I think that there's some rich themes here. There's some intellectual themes, but the story and characters, I think, are what I'm most proud of. And I'll go back to that social justice theme at the end. These ideas behind that part of the book, were several years ago, and yet this book came out during this time when social justice is again really important, and we're thinking about it hard and how to address that. So, I mentioned the levels. Do we have levels today?
It's a very interesting, thought-provoking question. I don't know. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, you don't have to tell me. Do we have levels today, right?
Yeah, it would be really hard. It's hard to really think about that, and to think about then the structure of our whole society, and to question everything and where technology's gotten us and where it's going. And it seems like that's exactly what your book is going to help us do.
Yes, right. Well, one of the purposes of speculative fiction is sort of a mirror of our own time, not necessarily entirely about the future itself, but reflects on our own time. When Isaac Asimov wrote the Foundation books, many saw in the Foundation, World War II and Hitler and the rise of that. So, yes, I think that the books talk about our own time as well. So, to summarize, I think there's just many things going on in Unfettered Journey. As you said, it's a cross-genre novel. It explores what I think is a highly likely future, hopefully without the levels. But I hope that we can continue to make progress on social justice. I think that our human interactions, how we treat one another, will continue to be a human challenge, to refine that and improve that. Steven Pinker wrote his famous recent book about the better angels of our nature, arguing, I think quite rightly, that human history has shown that humans have become less violent over civilized time, and he saw that trend continuing. And I hope he's right, but I do think that will continue to be a challenge. How do we deal with our fundamental competitiveness as animals, right? So that's a theme in the book, and then how we use our technology. And as this technology evolves, how do all of us find purpose in this more and more complicated world?
Well, that sounds like a perfect way to bring our interview to a close. And this has been a really intriguing talk. There's so much to think about with this book after reading it, and you've given us even more coming and doing this interview, which is awesome. So thank you so much for joining me, Gary, and to everyone watching and listening, thank you for joining Gary and I as we dove into Unfettered Journey. Again, I'm Judy Marino, and this has been Gary Bengier. Gary, it's been so great to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Judy, and encourage everyone to go to wherever you buy books, Amazon and Nook and Barnes & Noble, and look for Unfettered Journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a great conversation, and have a lovely rest of your day.